What's up, guys? What's going on? It is Dives, Mr. Crackpot on Twitter. Welcome to Party on Broad. The Party on Broad podcast can be found on iTunes and Spotify. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. Joining us today, of course, is our co-host, Rob. Check him out on Twitter at Philly_Madness. Check out his other podcast called The Madness Podcast starring Jessica Town. What's going on, Rob?
You know, I didn't put a hat on today. I know we've talked about this in the past. I was really excited today because I actually have hair on the top of my head for the first time in about 6 years, and I wanted to see how it looked on a podcast. But now that I'm looking at it, I'm wearing a hat every damn time we come on for the rest of my time here on Party on Broad.
You have a lot more hair than I do, man.
I don't know, it's finally coming back a little bit, but man, it's spotty, shall we say?
These are some crazy times with the quarantine, and now we just heard that Adam Schefter, they're doing a live mock trial on Monday, so they don't even know if this whole virtual draft is going to work, man. Is this not the most fun, most chaotic draft of all time?
It really is. I watched Howie Roseman and Andy Weidel their Zoom press conference yesterday that they did. They seem very confident in the Eagles' abilities. I mean, Howie said he had the IT guy come in, and basically what he had in the office at the NovaCare complex is what is in his home office right now. But yeah, it's, you talk about waiting to run this mock draft. I'm curious to see which team accidentally shows their hand, probably the Texans. I'm just going to make a guess, and actually make who they want to pick there. It's going to be really awkward at that point.
Yeah, man, you and me, man, we're tweeting mocks like every day, pretty much every other hour. We're pumping these mock drafts, getting other people's reactions to it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm not even tweeting all of them. I'm doing about 10 times more a day, and I'm just picking one I have 4 right now. I'm actually today going to put up a picture of 4 and just say which one do you like better. I've gone down such a rabbit hole with this stuff. It's like I actually know guys' names in the 7th round this year just because of doing mock drafts. So I like it from that. But this is what quarantine life is. You said it. It's chaotic.
I love it, man. I love it. I love it. Love it. I've been studying these guys for months and months and months. And then Adam Schefter puts out a tweet this morning saying he talked to a general manager who's looked at everyone, like all the top draft experts, and said their boards are completely wrong. Which to me, like as a draft nut, diehard junkie, whatever, I'm just so excited. I could not be more excited. I love that.
It makes for a really entertaining draft night, especially night one, because that first time a guy's name comes up and you thought he was going late first round and he goes in the top 12 picks or something. It's going to be, and really for the Eagles, I'm really intrigued to see how this receiver thing falls. Most mocks have them starting at 11 to the Jets and kind of rolling between 11 and 15, and then maybe Jefferson making it to 21. But, who's to say the Jets say, no, we're not going to do it now? Or the 49ers say, hey, let's trade out. Let's trade back or something like that. It is and then you look at some of the other names. You look at the edge rushers, the linebackers, the safeties, and it's going to be – I think this will be even more fun than people expect it to be, which has me excited.
Yeah, man, I could not agree more. And on tap for today, we have a special guest. He is Zach Berman. He covers the Philadelphia Eagles for The Athletic, one of the best Eagles guys on Twitter, around, writers, you name it. Let's roll the credits, and we'll get straight to the interview.
Sixers win it! Wow! Oh, man, and being just posterized Russell Westbrook. You love the Philadelphia Eagles! Let me get a hell yeah!
All right, guys, joining us today is one of the best in the business. He is Zach Berman from The Athletic. Follow him at ZBerm on Twitter and check out all of his work at theathletic.com. Make sure to follow The Athletic on Twitter at theathleticphi. First of all, thank you so much for joining us today, Zach. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I appreciate that introduction. I apologize for my attire. As I said when I called in, I thought we were doing this over audio, not video. So this is a bit of an adjustment. I didn't shave this morning. I apologize, but I'm ready to talk Eagles.
Do it. All right. So, Rob, lead us off with the question, my man.
All right, so yesterday, Zach, I was listening on the Zoom conference you guys had with Howie and Andy Weidel, and they seem to believe they're well equipped for this virtual draft. They're ready to go with it. But how much of an effect do you see this whole thing having on their draft? Will they play it more safe, because I know that they're all about face-to-face in the building with these guys, which they haven't been able to do, or is it going to be just like Howie said, there are no excuses, we got to hit on this draft?
I don't think it's going to affect them much. I think similar to what Howie said, there's no excuses. They need to hit on this draft. They still have access to these players, as you well know. I think that certainly from a medical perspective, there might be an adjustment. I think too much is being made of that, to be frank with you. If anything, maybe you'll see kind of more toward Andy Weidel's personality of he's really looking for a certain type of toughness, a certain type of personality. And that's similar to what Joe Douglas had. I think one of the maybe changes that you saw is Joe was really focused and really emphasized college production. And I still think that's something that they value. But when they were going back and looking through that, and you started to see this adjust a bit last year, that maybe there won't be as much weight placed on the college production component. But I do think that for the most part, it's going to be business as usual in terms of how they're drafting, how they're scouting.
There was a couple of tweets today by Adam Schefter. One was saying everyone's mock boards are completely wrong from a GM, and they're doing a virtual test on Monday. What could possibly go wrong? It's just a few days before the start of the NFL draft. Just so hilarious. Zach, so a lot of the talk on Twitter has been about Justin Jefferson and his fit with the Philadelphia Eagles. Like, what is your take on Justin Jefferson? Does he have the speed to play on the outside to consistently put pressure on a defense? What's your take, man?
Yeah, I think he's a good player. And, that's fairly obvious. You see the production that he had at LSU. He's a good fit, too. He's someone that you draft him. The Eagles need production at wide receiver. I think he could help there. The question I have, and there's not really an answer right now, is what's the ceiling? If you're talking about Keenan Allen, it's an outstanding pick. If you're talking about, and I'd use this comparison, Jordan Matthews, someone who was really productive in college, who kind of checked off all the boxes, had good athletic testing, and came in and was productive, but you didn't see him kind of take that next step. That might be a concern when you're talking about number 21. Now, I think that he's the fourth best wide receiver. I think he'd be a good pick at number 21 if he's there. I think it would make a lot of sense. I think it would improve their offense. It would be a major step for that wide receiver core. When you talk 3-4 years out, is he a Pro Bowl player or is he a really solid wide receiver? Development's going to have a lot to do with it. But I would be impressed with the Justin Jefferson pick, and I think it would check off a lot of boxes.
Okay.
Zach, to stay on that Justin Jefferson idea, the major debate you've seen on Twitter with this guy is, well, he's a slot receiver. He's not an outside receiver. He's this and that. And it's become very divisive, all over Twitter. But does this slot versus outside position really matter? Or is it completely overblown, especially when you look at the Eagles, who just need talent at this position?
That's a valid point, Rob. I think that it does matter, but I agree. The Eagles just need talent. So if Justin Jefferson is coming in and he's a 60-plus catch guy from year one, and that production's coming from the slot, I think that's really valuable. I mean, Nelson Aguilar, they won a Super Bowl with Nelson Aguilar as a really dynamic player in the slot. That being said, I think they need to change the shape of the offense, and they need a threat on the outside. And you want Justin Jefferson to have that inside-outside versatility. The other thing to consider is if the Eagles are going to play as much two tight end as they would like to, and when you look at the percentage of 12 personnel they played last season and the fact that they spent a second-round pick on Dallas Goedert, and frankly, Dallas Goedert's talent warrants that type of playing time, then it's just a matter of how do you incorporate a slot receiver with two tight ends on the field. It's certainly possible, and you can flex guys out, and Zach Ertz has the versatility to move. But if Justin Jefferson's best production is coming from the slot, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you certainly want the versatility to be able to flex him outside. what you saw in Nelson Aguilar's case the past 2 years in particular, when they had injuries on the outside, was that he was not as productive when he bounced outside. And so I think it really did limit the type of production that he was giving them. So the question is really, is he a slot only guy, or does he have inside outside versatility?
They honestly just need a playmaker, man. Just give me a playmaker. Sure. All right. Between Todd McShay, Daniel Jeremiah, Dane Brugler, like all of these guys, at least the biggest news of the last 2 weeks, these main guys have had the Eagles taking a linebacker in the first round in all of their mocks. But the Eagles have not taken a linebacker since 1979 in the first round, man. How realistic is it that the Eagles take a linebacker in this first round, dude?
I would be surprised. And I say that for the reasons you mentioned. And really from an organizational perspective, it's not a position that they valued with resources. That being said, if you have a 3-down linebacker who's a difference maker, and if you think Kenneth Murray and Patrick Queen could be difference makers, then it's certainly worthy of consideration. But if the Eagles don't go wide receiver in the first round, just based on their organizational philosophy, I think there's a better chance they go with an edge rusher than a linebacker. But you need to look at value. And if, for instance, if a guy like Gross Matos, if you think that he has the type of upside or the ranking on your board, the tier on your board of a Kenneth Murray or a Patrick Queen, then you might gear more toward the linebacker. And you did see when, for instance, when Andy Weidel was in Baltimore, they did draft linebackers, and it's a position they valued, and they got good ones. And you've seen difference makers at that position. The hit rate, frankly, in the first round has been fairly high if you can get a difference-making linebacker. And it's a position of need for the Eagles. I'm just if I was doing my kind of mock draft before the draft, and I will put one together for the Athletic, excuse me, I don't anticipate them taking a linebacker in the first round.
Well, just quickly, what is your take on Isaiah Simmons? Because they lost Malcolm Jenkins. Yeah. They're looking for that hybrid safety linebacker guy that can play that fit right that role. What's your quick take on Isaiah Simmons? There's all over the place to take on him.
Yeah, I love the player, and outside of Chase Young, I would rather have him over anyone in this draft for the Eagles. I mean, I think he's a difference maker. I think he's special, and I don't get caught up in the type of in what position he plays, because if you can't find a spot for him, the problem is not the player. The problem is the coaching staff, in my opinion.
Zach, let's go back to the position that every single fan wants him to address in the first round. That's that wide receiver. And we know the top four. You were talking about them. Ruggs, Lamb, Jeudy, and Jefferson. Outside of those guys, who are guys that you view as really good fits for the Eagles that they can maybe get either at 21 or trade back some key picks and maybe get towards into the late 20s?
Yes, I'm sorry. I had a little break up there, but I get your question. I would think that after kind of those top four, it's really a matter of what type of player you're seeking. Jalen Reagor, I like him as a player who can stretch the field. I would think that's more of a trade back scenario than drafting at 21. But if you like the player, you always want to be a pick too early than a pick too late. Brandon Ayuk is someone who people really like, and if you look at you look at the wingspan on him, you look at the run after the catch ability. There's reason to like it. There's only 1 year of major college production. He was a JUCO player. But he is intriguing there. I like Shenault, personally. I don't think the Eagles are going to take Shenault. And the reason I say that is because I think the Eagles are going to steer clear of players with injury concern, especially early on, just because of what you see with injuries during the past few years. That being said, if I had to gamble on which of those guys kind of after the top three, top four, who would become Pro Bowl players, I think Shenault has Pro Bowl potential. But I don't think the Eagles go in that direction.
Yeah, that the medical concerns there, they have missed so much lately in the draft of wide receiver. I just can't see them taking Shenault. I just cannot see it. There's a lot of chatter about the Eagles possibly moving up and down in the first round. What is your gut feeling right now, a week before the draft? Do they trade up? Do they trade back? Do they stay put at 21? What's your take?
I wish I knew. I mean, I personally think there's a better chance of them trading back than them trading up. I've heard really smart people try to convince me otherwise, and I certainly understand the logic in trading up for a difference-making player. And like Howie Roseman said yesterday, that you saw in 2010, they traded up for Brandon Graham, then they traded back for Cooper Ray picks. I just don't think the Eagles are going to come out of this draft without a volume of players. I think that's going to be something that's a major emphasis. 2018, they drafted 5 players. 2019, they drafted 5 players. I think if I'm setting the over-under right now at 7.5, the Eagles have 8 picks. If I'm setting the over-under at 7.5, I will go with over instead of under. So I think that they're a team that's of the profile more of trading back than a team of trading up. But like Howie said, if you're trading 2 picks or 3 picks to move up a few spots in the first round to get that wide receiver, it certainly makes sense to trade back, whether you're talking about your second round or your third rounder, trade back and recuperate picks that way. I also wouldn't be surprised if they move a player up next week. Rasul Douglas is a player we've discussed in that regard. But I think they're going to find a way to get picks. But I would say, to answer your question succinctly, there's a better chance of them trading back than trading up.
Okay.
Now, if they do trade back, because I agree with you, I just don't see them spending even more picks, especially after Darius Slay trade and losing 2 picks there to trade up. You kind of touched on it. The Eagles are known for drafting in the trenches in the first round. I mean, they've done it. I forget what the actual number is, but it's most of Howie's drafts have been in the trenches. You talked about the defensive side. Is there a guy out there, maybe the center for Michigan, Ruiz, that you could see the Eagles very, very upsettingly to the fans draft an offensive lineman in the first round?
Yeah, I would be surprised. I know they've been sniffing around these interior offensive linemen, and it makes sense from a team building perspective. But if you're drafting a guard center type player in round 1, unless it's a trade back scenario, I'd be really surprised. The position that I would say, in my opinion, is the most likely for them to take in round 1, other than wide receiver, is defensive end. It's a position that I think they have a long-term need at. They have depth, but I don't know if you can categorize it as quality depth.
Yep.
You have your starters entrenched in Graham and Barnett. Josh Sweat showed potential last year. They traded a 4th-round pick for Avery. They spent a 4th-round pick on Sharif Miller. But really, how many of those guys after your starters are you looking at and saying he's a core player going forward? If you think one of these defensive ends, I mentioned Gross Matos. There's Empaneza. There's a few guys. It's not a great edge rushing class. If the LSU edge rusher Chasen, if he drops, I'm not as great with the pronunciations. I spell better than I say it sometimes. But if he drops, then certainly I think that's a position of organizational emphasis. Offensive line, they always look there, like you mentioned, but I don't see them taking a tackle. I think they'll take an interior offensive lineman at some point in the draft, but I would be really surprised if it's a round 1 pick.
Totally agree. I love the scenario of trading down in the first round, then trading up in the second round. There's so many talented guys, I think, in this day 2 range, man. Dude, Zach, after the first round, who are some of your favorite guys in that day 2 range?
Yeah, so it really depends on who they go in round 1. If you go wide receiver in round 1, then what are you doing in round 2? If you don't go wide receiver round 1, then you really need to push someone in round 2. Excuse me. I like some of these safeties in the second round. I don't think Delpit's going to fall as much as people think. But when you look at like Antoine Winfield, when you look at Ashton Davis, I think deep safety especially, is a long-term need for the Eagles. Rodney McLeod's going to be 30 next month. Jalen Mills and Will Parks are on 1-year deals. You don't know their kind of core pieces going forward. I think the Eagles haven't drafted a safety that early since Jaquan Jarrett back in 2011. So that's a position that I think value could meet need there. I mentioned edge rusher. Are you looking at someone like Curtis Weaver in the second round? If you don't take one in round 1, it's not a great edge rusher class. Jonathan Grenard's a name you mentioned. I think day 3, I've looked at some players there. Tyler Johnson's a wide receiver I really like from Minnesota. If you guys watch the Big Ten, he just makes plays. These past 2 years, He just made plays, and I think he's a quarterback-friendly wide receiver. I like Davion Taylor from Colorado in terms of an athletic linebacker, tested well. I think he has potential. There's a handful of guys that you look at and you say there are potential fits. But in terms of those day two players, like you mentioned, it really depends. If they don't go wide receiver round one, they need to go round two. And then you're looking at the guys who fall, whether it's a Jalen Reagor. You hear KJ Hamler. He gives you the deep speed. Is he a slot only guy, or can he bounce on the outside? I know speed usually translates, but that's something to watch. Or do you go with like a Michael Pittman, a Chase Claypool, a bigger type of wide receiver after you didn't necessarily – I shouldn't say necessarily. You didn't hit on J.J. Arcega-Whiteside last year. So there, I could give you a firm answer after day one once I knew if I know who they go with. But that's really the question, because I think everything's dynamic based on that round one pick.
Awesome.
Zach, we were talking about the linebackers and how the Eagles don't necessarily value them enough to maybe take one in the first round. Mm-hmm. The problem is they are beyond thin at that position right now, with Nate Gerry kind of leading the pack. Do they really feel comfortable with what they have in-house, or do you think at some point in this draft they're going to be taking a guy that they hope they can get someone to step on the field this year?
It's a good question. They like TJ Edwards. I know that. So you have Nate Gerry entering his fourth season with the team. He's a returning starter. TJ Edwards is a player they really like. They signed Jatavius Brown. Duke Riley, I think, is more of a special teams guy, but they like him as well. And I think that's where the conversation about Kenneth Murray or Patrick Queen comes, because really you don't have a difference maker at the second level. And the Eagles can say all they want, how this is a sub-package game, and they're going to play multiple safeties, and they're going to play, either a heavy dime sometimes with three safeties, a heavy nickel with three safeties, and bring a safety into the box. I still think if you can get a linebacker who changes the game, or who's a force in the middle of your defense, that's important. And after round one, I don't know if you find that type of player. So to answer your question, anyone who they're drafting after round one, I don't think you can say he's pencil him in as your starting linebacker. I just don't think it's that type of class. I think you have two guys at the top. Well, three guys if you include Simmons, but we're not even discussing him because he won't be on the board. But you have Murray and Queen, and I think there's a drop-off thereafter.
All right, last question, Zach. I got to ask you, man, what is your bold prediction? What are the Eagles going to do at 21 in that first round, man?
I think Justin Jefferson. I think value meets need. I know it's a cliche pick to make, but the reason it's a cliche is because it's a player that fits the Eagles. It's a position that the Eagles need. And even if there's a run on wide receivers, a run on, let's say, the top three, the way I look at it is quarterbacks always go up the board early. I think offensive tackles are going to go up the board early. So if you have at least three, maybe four quarterbacks going in the top 20, okay? If you have five offensive tackles perhaps going in the top 20. If you think that those top, the dream scenario is Ruggs falling. I don't think that's going to happen. But I just think that there's going to be teams in the teens who we are penciling in as a potential team taking Justin Jefferson, who might say, we can get our wide receiver in the second round. Let's get the cornerback now. Let's get the offensive tackle now. And I think that's why I think Justin Jefferson is going to be on the board at 21.
Awesome. All right, make sure you give a follow to my man Zach Berman on Twitter @ZBerm. Thank you so much for joining, man. Dude, you're the man.
Anytime. Glad to come on. I'll shave next time, dress better, make sure my backdrop's okay. But I'm glad to do this.
Quarantine life, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Guys. Take it easy, man.
Sixers win it! Wow! Oh, man, and being just posterized Russell Westbrook. You love the